must guide the effort. With respect to Israel, the President has made it plain that the continuation of Israeli settlement activity is without legitimacy. Of course, the President has said this more than once. And frankly, it is not nice to ignore the President. Nor have presidents found it prudent to let themselves be ignored. The American Constitution, after all, does begin with 3 words: we the people. And ultimately, the people will notice, and they will react. With respect to Palestine, the President has made it apparent that Palestine must not merely be an amalgamation of anti-Semitic hatred or violence, but a viable political and economic nation-state. What then is the way ahead for Israel and Palestine together as these 2 autonomous states living side by side in peace? Now here the President and the Secretary and our Special Envoy George Mitchell have been careful to not be overly prescriptive, to give maximum flexibility to the parties so that the negotiations can succeed within the terms and interests of those most directly affected. Unfortunately, very little has happened in that context. And so now, let me introduce a parenthetical, if I can. I am an academic by training, and so count this as a footnote. This is a footnote that you should record in your notes as not necessarily being the specific policy of the United States, but rather one that I point out to you as worthy of your consideration. There are, in fact, many foreign policy advisors to the President, and they are numerous. And I cannot say that Professor Zbigniew Brzezinski, the former national security advisor who is well known to you by reputation, is primus inter pares, first among equals, but he is a respected voice. And let me commend to you his summary of what he would anticipate to be consistent with the President and the Secretary's vision. Settlement must be based on the 1967 lines with appropriate swaps, with territorial compensation to Palestine. There must be realism, continues Professor Brzezinski, about refugees. Palestinian refugees will need to be accommodated in the Palestinian territory with compensation and public apology to those displaced. Professor Brzezinski is not being an academic, he's not hesitant to wade into the toughest issues. So, of course, he has commented upon Jerusalem as well. Jerusalem, he writes, must be genuinely shared, an Israeli capital in the west, a Palestinian in the east, with the old city shared under international auspices. And for good measure, Dr. Brzezinski would articulate the need for an international force to be stationed along the Jordan River to maintain the security of both sides. Now let me repeat, those specific elements are not the official United States policy, but they are, in my judgment, a reasonable elaboration of the President's vision. Yet nothing happens when nothing is happening. And so the United States is working with parties to resume negotiations on permanent status issues, including security, borders, refugees, and Jerusalem as soon as possible and with a set timetable for their successful conclusion. As Secretary Clinton has said, and I quote here directly, "We believe that through good faith negotiations, the parties can mutually agree on an outcome which ends the conflict and reconciles the Palestinian goal of an independent and viable state based on the 1967 lines with agreed swaps and the Israeli goal of a Jewish state with secure and recognized borders that reflect subsequent developments and meet Israeli security requirements." Now, while initially upon taking office, the President gave primary and indeed near exclusive emphasis to the work of the Special Envoy, it is the present thinking that negotiations ought to proceed on a variety of tracks. These will include high-level direct talks to establish a framework for the negotiations and to set a positive atmosphere in which those negotiations can proceed. Parallel or so-called proximity talks between the United States and Israel and the United States and Palestine on key issues such as security will go forward. And lower-level direct talks in which the negotiators work through the details of the issue will proceed as well. We had hoped, this ambassador hopes, and still hopes, that this meeting fits into that multi-venue approach. And I am indeed grateful to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean and the United Nations to extend this opportunity to address